The title of the lecture is Meeting of the Ganges and the Jordan. Now, most of you know that some of the greatest civilizations sprang up on river banks. When we read the history of human civilizations, you find many of the greatest and highest civilizations with a strong spiritual undercurrent had their origin on river banks. Ganga is the holiest river of Vedantic tradition, Hindu tradition, and Jordan is the place where Prophet Elisha performed his miracles. It is a place where, following Moses' death, as Joshua led the Israelites across the river, God produced dry land when the priest carrying the Ark of Covenant stepped into the water. So, and that's a river where John the Baptist baptized many spiritual seekers, where Jesus himself was baptized by John. Coming to Ganga, it goes back to several thousands of years. The earliest human document on religious and spiritual tradition is supposed to be Rig Veda, around 3,500 years BC. One of the most beautiful verses in the Rig Veda Samhita is a prayer to 10 great rivers, beginning with Ganges or Ganga. The whole book runs into 10 divisions. There are more than 10,100 verses called Rigs. Of these, one of the most beautiful verses is a tribute to 10 great rivers, most of them originating from Himalayas. Imamme Gange Yamune Saraswati Sududristom Sachada Parushnya Asiknya Marudvrdhe Vidastaya Arjikiye Srunuhya Asusomaya. This is the ancient verse, not in modern Sanskrit. It is a very ancient language. It's called Vedic Sanskrit, which is perhaps the mother of most of modern European languages and most of Indian languages. 10 rivers are mentioned: Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, Sududri, Parushni, Asikni, Pitasta, Sushoma, Arjikiya, Marudvrdha. All of them mostly flowing towards Bay of Bengal, eastward or westward, and many of them starting from the top of Himalayas, merging with Ganga or Yamuna as they reach the plains. Now, most of the greatest spiritual traditions of Vedanta had their origin on the banks of Ganga. Not only philosophical spiritual traditions, some of the greatest artists, now some of the greatest names in literature were all residents of places close to the Ganga. Now, going back to the earlier subject, as I said, river plays a very important role in spiritual culture. See, Jordan has got a significance in the traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all the three religious traditions. And especially, it has a great significance in the history of Judaism and Christianity, because it is the river that makes it possible for you to think of the beyond, the transcendental. If you are living on the close to the ocean, people normally become adventurous, seafaring people going in search of greater and more comforts and pleasures, more of adventurous culture. But those who live close to the rivers will have abundance of the primary necessities of human subsistence. You know, when society settled down to agricultural activities, that was the beginning of higher values in society. Because when our primary necessities of secular life are met, are fulfilled, then only we can think of the beyond, the transcendental, what lies beyond. So, when we live close to the rivers, I'm talking about early times, not today. Today you can live anywhere. You can get food grains from 5,000 miles, 10,000 miles across the other part of the globe. I'm talking about the early stages, phases of human civilization. When a society settles down close to a river, it gets water for irrigation, food grains grow, regular crops and yields, which ensure the fulfillment of primary necessities of our life. Enough food, enough clothing, and so on. Now, when we settle down to a regular agrarian civilization, we start thinking of what lies beyond. Literature, philosophy, art. All this grew only on the banks of the rivers. That is just one important aspect with regard to civilizations. Now, what about spirituality, especially these two rivers? As I said earlier, the river Jordan is so interlinked to the Judo-Christian spiritual tradition for the simple reason that Jesus was baptized in the waters of Jordan, and John the Baptist started baptizing people in that holy river. For that reason, it becomes holy. Now, with regard to Ganga, there is another significance. Most of the great spiritual dialogues in ancient India took place on the banks of the Ganga. And one of the most famous dialogues is related to the great classic known as Bhagavata Purana. It's a great classic divided into 12 sections. To be precise, the whole work is a description of how to prepare, how to live your life intelligently so that you can face death with wisdom, with God's name in your lips and God's form in your heart. How to live intelligently and die intelligently. In fact, that is the central theme of this book. I shall give a background of this story. It is an exposition of the highest spiritual philosophy by a great saint to a king who asked some questions. The dialogue took place on the bank of Ganga. There was a great emperor in ancient times. His name was Parikshit. He was very noble. He was very popular among his subjects, well known for his kingly virtues. But something happened to him, a tragic event. And that is a very tragic event. He was known for his nobility, morality, and kingly virtues. But on one occasion, he committed a very serious sin or a mistake. He was hunting in the forests. In those days, it was the duty of a king or an emperor to see that the saints and sages meditating in forest hermitages are not disturbed. So it was the duty to kill wild animals. That was the purpose. When lions and tigers, when they increase beyond the number, they become a big menace to human beings. So the saints and sages meditating in forest who have to practice non-violence can't do anything. So it was the king's duty to guarantee safety and security of the mendicants, hermits living in forests. So he was hunting in the forests. So once it so happened that he was hungry and thirsty, and he entered a forest hermitage. When he entered, he found an old man sitting there with his eyes closed, completely absorbed in meditation, without being aware of what was happening around him. Totally unconscious. The king was hungry and thirsty. So even such a noble-hearted man can lose his balance when he becomes hungry and thirsty. After all, hunger makes you angry, and anger completely destroys our balance, temper. So the king became very angry. It never happened to him before. But it so happened, it was a most unguarded moment in his life. He saw an old saint, a mendicant, a great sage with long beard, matted hair, taking the holy names of God and completely absorbed, unconscious of what was happening around. He didn't get up from his seat because he didn't know the king had entered the hermitage. So when he got angry, he said, I want to know whether you are just pretending to be completely absorbed in samadhi or is it really genuine? So he looked around and he found a dead snake lying nearby. It's a forest, mind you. He took the snake with the bow in his hand and put it around the neck of the sage and went away. Now, all this happened on the banks of Ganga, and the dialogue that is going to take place also happened on the banks of Ganga. So, after some time, his son, the sage's son, came to the hermitage. Remember, I should tell you, to give a background, in those days, many of these mendicants and hermits living in forests, they were all retired householders. I mentioned on a previous occasion, in those days, it was the custom for aged couple, when they become old, maybe 70 or 80 years old, they will retire to a lonely place, mostly to a forest hermitage, and spend the rest of their lifetime in contemplation and meditation. So this sage was also such a great spiritual seeker who fulfilled his obligations as an householder and retired the forest with his wife, spending their time reading holy scriptures or meditation or taking the holy names of God. Now his son came and he found this sage was sitting there totally absorbed in meditation with a dead snake around his neck. So the little boy got angry. He was perhaps the grandson of the sage or maybe the youngest son. And he said, well, the person who have done such a heinous crime should be a very evil person. He entered the river and took few drops of water and chanted a mantra and put a curse on the evildoer, this man, whoever it may be, who has committed such a heinous crime, will die on the seventh day from now. That was the curse. And die bitten by a snake, mind you, because he had put a dead snake on the neck of my father, so he should have a taste of his own medicine. So he will die bitten by a snake on the seventh day from now, because he had acted against the will of God. My father is meditating on God, and this person had insulted my father. Now, after long hours, the sage opened his eyes, and his son was sitting there weeping. The son narrated the story, and you know how the sage responded. He became very upset. You have done a great mistake by cursing this noble-hearted king. He must have got hungry and thirsty, and he must have lost his balance and must have done this mischief, putting the dead snake around my neck. But you should not have cursed him, because if a good king dies, the whole population, subjects, will suffer. So you have committed a terrible sin. Now, the sage sent some of his other disciples to the king, informing him about the mischief that his own son had done, cursed the king to die on the seventh day. How does king respond? That is still much more interesting. The king said, well, I did make a mistake. I committed a sin by insulting the great sage who was meditating on God, by putting this dead snake around his neck. So I deserve this. So rather, this curse has punished me properly. I deserve this punishment. So how a man responds to a situation when he is suddenly informed that he had only 7 days to live, 7 into 24 hours to live. Normally, what will people do? They will withdraw all the money from the bank. They will go to Las Vegas or Hawaii. Will go on a world cruising trip. So that's the best way to spend whatever money you have got and make the best of the avail. Or they may get shocked, they may collapse, high BP, hypertension, and that also may take them closer to death earlier than destiny. But this man responded differently. He was a wise man, this king. He said, I led a good life till now, but I made a mistake. And it was a very serious mistake. I insulted a great sage who was meditating on God. So I deserve this. And I have 24 into 7 hours to live, only 7 days. So he renounced his kingdom, his comfort, his family, mind you, and alone he went to the bank of Ganges. When people came to know of these great events taking place in the palace, the great emperor was giving up his kingdom, comforts, everything, and addressed himself as a mendicant and giving up all the silk clothes and crowns, everything. He dressed himself, perhaps most probably, in some kind of primitive clothing made of tree skins of different trees, or maybe some deer skin and things like that. And he started his journey, his pilgrimage to Ganga. Now, if you read the great work, The Way of the Pilgrim, the great Russian classic, mystical classic, where the pilgrim starts his journey in search of his spiritual father, traveling through different places in Siberia and Russia, going in search of his spiritual father and his experiences. He passes through river banks. He passes through certain places which are highly disturbed also, you find, because the event is supposed to have taken place somewhere in 19th century. Many such events you come across other identical mystical literature. Pilgrimage, prayers, meditation, repentance, and going in search of a spiritual goal. All these go together. Now, coming back to the story, when the king reached the banks of the river Ganga, many saints and sages and philosophers who heard about this event had assembled there to meet him. The greatest of those saints was Shuka, who is the teacher of the Bhagavata Purana, who is the one who teaches the spiritual philosophy of the great devotional classic, Bhagavata Purana, which expounds the teachings and life of Lord Krishna, the teacher of Bhagavad Gita. So, when this great saint came, the king puts one very, very important question to him. All this took place on the banks of the river Ganga. So, the question that he puts to the king, to the sage, the question the king puts the sage is this. Atha prichami samsiddhim yoginam paramam gurum purusha seha yatkaryam mriyamanasi sarvata. This is the verse from the spiritual classic. Now look here, O great saint. I want to ask you one question. Yoginam paramam gurum. You are the teacher of all the great yogis, spiritual seekers. Purusha seha yatkaryam mriyamanasi sarvata. What should a man or a woman do when death is staring at him or her? So, as I mentioned on many previous occasions, in Vedantic tradition, death is only a transition point. There is nothing disturbing about it, nothing scary about it. It is just one particular transition point in the endless flow of evolution of our life. So, when this question was put to him, the sage replied, well, I should say something more about the question. The king continued substantiating, explaining his question. What should a person do? How he should meditate? Whom he should meditate upon? How he should conduct himself? He has to continue his day-to-day activities, though he has only 7 days left. How he should, his attitude towards his own duties and responsibilities will undergo a radical change, no doubt about it. As I said earlier, one may become completely lost himself, or one may fall sick, or one may become a bohemian, an Epicurean, a licentious person. So all these are possible. So, and not only that, what he should not do. What should a person do so that he can live his life intelligently in this world and face death with wisdom? And what he should not do. So, first the sage addresses the later part of the question. Bruhi yadva viparireyam. That's the later part of the question. And what a person should not do. So, the sage said, see, normally what do we find in this world? People, when they are young, they run after material comforts. When they are small babies or children, small babies spend most of their time in sleep. When they are small children, they play. When they are young, they go after sensory pleasures. When they are middle-aged, they are eager to get back their lost youth, vitality. When they are old, then they become depressed. This is the miserable condition of human existence. So, these different stages come one after another. Mostly, we take the decision too late. So when we are young, small, very small, our time is spent in sleep. Babies spend their time. When we are children, boys and girls, we spend our time in play. That's all waste of time. Very hard thing to listen to, I know, but the sage was a great saint. He wanted to speak some very unpleasant truths for the good of humanity. That's what we find here. When we are young, we are deluded by the transitory sensory pleasures. When we are old, then we become depressed because the youth has vanished. And when death comes, with a curse in our lips, we leave this world. Don't you think this is something terrible? So, there is a way out. And the sage says, Edavan Sankhya Yogabhyam Sudharma Parinishthaya Janma Labha Parapumsam Ante Narayana Smriti. You find this in the second book of this classic, the first chapter, 6th verse or so. There is a way out. We belong to different temperaments, different characteristics. Some people are very active. Some people would like to pray, meditate, do puja. There are some others who tell you, well, I don't believe in God, but I believe in some kind of universal spirit. Then there are those who would like to go to yoga studio. So there are 4 groups. Any of these 4 yogas you can practice. If you are of an active temperament, you look upon whatever we do as an offering to God. That's how to spiritualize whatever we do, whatever we think, whatever we speak. Or you pray to God if you are of an emotional devotion temperament. And if you want to control your mind, you can practice Raja Yoga, as I mentioned. Or if you are a philosopher, you think and look around, find out what is happening. There is nothing in the world that remains permanent. Everything changes. So why should we go after these changing, fleeting, impermanent things? Why can't we focus on something that is truly worth concentrating on, worthwhile? Behind these changing, imperishable, impermanent things, there should be an immortal, eternal reality. Focus on that. That is Jnana Yoga. So, the saint says, there is nobody in the world who doesn't belong to any one of these 4 categories. If you're active, whatever we do, mentally, you offer to God as an offering. If you want to pray, you pray to God. If you are a philosopher who doesn't believe in God, who been created in creationism, so to speak, then you think, just analyze, rationally, philosophize, observe the fleeting phenomena around us, and think of the real, immortal, eternal reality behind this non-eternal phenomena. And then what's the purpose of this? He says, Janma labha para pumsam ante narayana smriti. That's a great instruction the saint gives. The ultimate goal of human life is to leave this world with God's form in our mind and God's name in our lips, with a smile, not with a curse. That's the great advice given by the saint. And in continuation of this instruction, the saints gave the whole exposition of Bhagavata Purana, which runs into 18,000 verses, divided into 12 sections, each section divided into several chapters. Now, this is the uniqueness of Ganges or Ganga in Vedantic tradition. So all that is worthwhile, spiritually or intellectually even worthwhile in Vedantic tradition has some relation, some connection to Ganga. Shankaracharya was born maybe 15,000, 16,000 miles away from Ganga, but he went straight there. He went to the Narmada, that's also one of the rivers mentioned here. And then Ganga, he went to Benares, the seat of Ganga. There he preached and taught. Buddha did not affirm the existence of a creator God. And he was born in Nepal. And he meditated under a tree in the Bihar state, maybe some 700 miles away from Benares. And Buddha straight went to Benares. So that's the uniqueness of Ganga in Vedantic tradition. And as for the river Jordan, as I already mentioned, all that is sacred, holy, and purifying in Judeo-Christian tradition originated on the banks of river Jordan. As I said, when Israelites were being led in the Jewish tradition, they crossed Jordan. So Jordan is mentioned not only in New Testament, also in Old Testament. So what I was trying to say is, rivers do play a very important role in the history of human civilizations. Now, when we read the books, the sacred books of these different spiritual traditions that originated on the banks of Ganga and on the banks of Jordan, you find going beyond the cultural, socio-anthropological, secondary details. If you reach the mystical, the universal, transcendental element, you find there is a unity, there is a harmony. Culture may be different, customs may be different, eating habits may be different, way of life could be different, but these are all socio-anthropological, cultural details. But behind and beyond all these secondary details, there is a spiritual experience which is emphasized in both these traditions. So, as I said, there are 4 levels of evolution in spiritual traditions that originated on the banks of these rivers. To begin with, there are rituals. Rituals could be different. In fact, there are similarities between the ritualistic practices of the ancient Jews and the Mimamsakas of ancient India. But still there are differences also. In mythology, there are differences. Even in philosophy, there are as many dissimilarities as there are similarities, parallelisms. But when it comes to spiritual experience, the highest experience level, you find there's a perfect harmony and unity. Because both these traditions begin with rituals, mythology, and philosophy and differences, but end in the inner experience, the spiritual experience. The kingdom of God mentioned in the Christian tradition is not very different from the concept of highest spiritual experience in Vedanta. But you should be able to look beyond theology to understand this. At the theological level, there are differences. Ritualistic level, there are differences. But when we reach the inner experience level, these differences, diversities vanish, and we find all these great spiritual civilizations spoke of the same truth which they experienced, but used different languages. That's all. So thank you. Namaskar.